This edition of Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Tim, Allison Cook, Eric Hervin, and Super Inframan. If you want to learn how you can sponsor the show, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight I welcome back Mr. Bernie Taylor. How are you doing, Bernie?
I'm doing great, Soraya. This is a big show. This is the show that we're going to change the world. Have you ever woken up in the morning and say something big's going to happen today?
A lot, yeah.
But it's supposed to be tomorrow morning because that's what we were scheduled for, right? So it couldn't have been this morning.
Right, yes. For some reason I put down the wrong date, even though it was in the emails correctly.
So I woke up this morning and thought, something big is going to happen today. And the big that's going to happen today is where we're going to go in this conversation. So if any of your listeners are on FM radio driving along right now, pull over. You don't want any accidents.
Tell people a little about yourself before we get into this. I've had you on here once before.
Absolutely. So my background is I see myself as a naturalist. I'm an animal person. And I started studying the concepts of animal timing. So I live in the Pacific Northwest, and salmon migrate earlier or later from one year to the next, but they all seem to migrate together. And species migrate, they all migrate later or earlier type of thing. Worked on that concept and worked with fish and wildlife biologists, and then we wrapped up a story, how it works, timing and so on, found that the Native Americans had the exact same thing in their calendars, went to the tribes and gave presentations. And people said to me, you really should be looking back at these calendars into the Paleolithic cave record in Europe. At that point, it was 20,000 years ago, and that was the dating. And I started looking at images, and lo and behold, the same nomenclature or the symbology related to how Native Americans time the salmon, the deer, and the elk, and all these other animals was exactly the same as it was next to the Paleolithic cave images, at least 17,000 years ago. And that was at Lascaux in France. And that story ended for me about 13 years ago. I gave a lot of presentations, scientific conferences, graduate seminars, that sort of stuff. I put it on the shelf because the world needed to catch up a little bit. And then the world did catch up. And then 10 years after that, I said, I'm going to start looking at this again. I had kind of a new angle to it. And I started looking at it. I looked at older caves because there had been a new way to date caves. And cave art became dated to about 40,000 years ago. So we jumped from 17 to 40,000 that was reliable dated. And I started looking at the oldest stuff. And I started looking at the images, and I did the exact same way as I did before. I'd look at the nomenclature, count the dots, all these sort of stuff, and that related to the animals. And then one day I was just sort of sitting back, glazy eyes, looking at one of these panels, and I said, oh my God, that looks like an elephant. And there were elephants in Europe at the time. They're now extinct. They don't look like an African elephant, but they sort of look like an Asian elephant with a humptail. But this had a flat head, just like an African elephant. So I contacted a friend of mine, actually not a friend, he became a friend of mine, who had an acquaintance from my mid-20s, I'm mid-50s now, and I met him in Beijing a long time ago. His name is George Schaller. And George and I, we worked through the images in this cave because they started pouring out. There's elephants, there was lions, there's ultimately giraffes. I mean, it was a long line of animals. And we went through these, and we kind of sorted out what was what, and we looked at all the taxonomic details. And we went through two major cave panels. And one of these cave panels at that time, when George and I were working on it, actually both cave panels, I should say, we found canids. So we're talking either dogs or wolves. And now these became the oldest images of dogs or wolves past like 20,000 years ago. So there's one kind of speculative in a cave in Europe. Not really sure. It's not really sure what it is. But we had images that you had a series of 2 and 3 dogs together that were of the same strain or breed. So it wasn't like this wasn't pareidolia. We're not making this stuff up. We could actually see the distinct features of them, and so we thought about this for a long time, and we went back and forth in emails. George and I. By the way, George is considered the world's foremost wildlife biologist. His name is George Shao, and that's who I met in Beijing. And he was working on Panda movie at the time or something. But anyway, George and I went back and forth, looked at these animals. We looked at these canids, which call them dogs. And some had ears up, and some had ears down. Now, when you look at a wolf, are the ears up or down?
Up.
Up.
Generally, yeah.
Domesticated dogs, ears up or down?
Down. Usually.
But trick question: they could be up or down.
Yeah, but they're more often down, I would think.
Well, it's mixed. So, shepherd, German shepherd. Ears up.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So there's this theory out there. It's not my theory. It's not a theory I prescribe to. That in domestication of animals, in case of dogs, the ears would drop down. But I've had you've probably petted dogs with ears up that were kinder than dogs with ears down. Okay. So that doesn't really fly. But that was the theory out there that we domesticated dog from wolves. Have you ever heard the concept before that dogs came from orphaned wolf cubs and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And that
it's what we tell our children.
Right. And they were raised along with packs of humans.
Exactly. Well, there was a DNA study, two of them done in 2000, released in 2013 Nature, another one in 2015 in Current Biology. The 2015 one, Current Biology, is very important. It is critical. It changes everything we ever thought about dogs. And in this study, they looked at the DNA of a wolf from 35,000 years ago. So we're looking at old DNA. And what they found was that dogs come from a common ancestor to wolf. Dogs don't come from wolves. And everybody's hands flew up in the air. Like, what the heck? How'd that come about? Well, the DNA didn't lie in this one. And there was a study in 2013 that said fundamentally the same thing. That study was done in Siberia and China. And so this fellow, Pontus Skoglund, became like the arch rival of archaeologists and people who study these things, because he's saying this is what the DNA tells us. You've got to go find some more fossils, to prove your side. But I've got this data right in front of us. Now, Skoglund's also at that time he was at the Harvard Medical School genetics department. So okay. This has got a lot of credibility. And you've heard of his work before outside of dogs. He was the same person who showed that or his team, I should say, that there's Asian DNA in South America.
Okay.
Or I guess South Pacific, let's say Indonesia, Singapore area DNA in South America.
Right.
As opposed to like Siberia. Okay. And that, again, he said to the archaeologist, well, how can it be true if we don't have the archaeological evidence? Well, the DNA doesn't lie. That archaeology is one piece of the puzzle. And many archaeologists have gone down the DNA route because they want to take control of those pieces of the puzzle. Very important. It's important. So anyway, Skoglund has a history of mucking up things for archaeologists. He also has a history of mucking up things for people who study the domestication of animals, specifically dogs. Okay. So Skoglund does a study, and he shows that dogs come from a common ancestor of the gray wolf. And the reason why people had been thinking that dogs actually the gray wolves or wolves were mixed up in genetics is that they continued to intermix. And so that gives the sort of false positive of there being dogs came from wolves genetically. But he went back 35,000 years ago and found the genes that show that this was pre-dogs mixing with wolves. And that's really important.
Yeah.
So the DNA is on the side of we didn't domesticate. Dogs existed before we domesticated them. Okay? And the archaeology, in fact, I'll say the fossil archaeology needs to catch up on that. And we have images now that pellet the caves. People go to my website, beforeorion.com, and if you're driving, just go back to Soraya's page and listen to this again. And so you do not write this down when you're driving. You can see some of these images. Okay, so the question then becomes, how did dogs become man's best friend?
Yeah.
So throw me a theory or two that pops to your head. It's, by the way, sorry, it's a crapshoot right now. I'm going to tell you that now. It's a total crapshoot. Your answer is as good as anybody else's.
Right. Yeah, I don't really know.
It's good. So George and I, we had a lot of email exchanges about this one. And George told me about a study he did. He's late 80s right now, and he must have done this like in his 30s or something. He was in Africa. He worked with an anthropologist, and this anthropologist had this hypothesis that man did well. We Homo sapiens, modern man, we didn't have projectile tools. Spear throwing. You could actually throw more than 20 yards and hit something. We didn't have anything like that for hundreds of thousands of years, but the archaeological evidence shows that we were eating meat. Mm-hmm. So where did we get the meat from? Okay, we didn't get from spears. We didn't get it throwing wooden spears. Okay, you could. When you look at these images on, maybe the old encyclopedias, you got all these cavemen hunched around a gazelle or something, and that they're hammering away at the bones, and that they just killed the gazelle. It didn't happen. Maybe, did they just kill off the diseased ones? I don't think so. So how did it happen? So what George and this anthropologist did was they followed animals, wild dogs in Africa and cheetah. They followed them around to see if they could keep up with those animals after they had made their kill, and if they could scare them off.
Oh, okay.
So that would suggest, if that's true, then we were the scavengers of the dogs and the cheetahs, and so they didn't come. There wasn't any orphan dogs that came to our campfires. We went to their kill. Completely way of different looking at the world. So next time you look at your dog down the floor, just say thank you. Yeah. So here's an interesting. And George is actually a big cat guy historically, and he said, you got to go look at cheetahs. So I started looking at the cheetah literature, and in our world here in the United States, people don't have pet cheetahs, but historically in the Middle East, people have had hundreds of pet cheetahs in their homes. Hundreds. So the sultans of that period. Right. And there's diplomats were given in the last 100 years. Diplomats were given cheetahs as pets. And so there's something unique about cheetahs. Cheetahs don't breed well in captivity. Okay? In fact, it's very rare for cheetahs to breed in captivity. So what the sultans were doing is they were paying people to go out in the bush to steal cheetah kittens. Oh. And they would bring those cheetah kittens back to the to the palace, but that was okay because cheetahs typically have 5 to 6 kittens, and only 2 or 3 survive past the first 2 months. Okay, it's a pretty rough world for a cheetah. So, we never want to take animals from the wild, but those cheetah kittens weren't going to make it anyway. Okay, so they brought these cheetahs into their palaces. And they taught them how to hunt, or rather, the cheetah already knew how to hunt. And what the cheetah would do is the cheetah would run down the gazelle, and then they'd go to the cheetah at the gazelle, and they'd cut off a piece of the gazelle, give the cheetah. Cheetah's happy as a clam, because they got something. Whereas in the wild, lions or something else is going to come run and steal it away. And then the cheetah actually would jump back on the jeep or the camel, on the back. They actually rode. The cheetah didn't run side by side, their horses and camels and stuff. Cheetah went for a ride, and they could even teach those cheetahs to discern between a male or female gazelle. So if they took down a female gazelle, they were not rewarded. So the cheetah learned pretty quick. So if I was out in the bush in Africa right now, and I have no food, I have no Costco and all this sort of stuff, I'd be following around a cheetah. When I see a cheetah make a kill, I'd let it do its thing, and then I'd scare it off with a big stick. And that's the world of a cheetah, because the cheetah eats almost every day, but it eats a little bit. Whereas a lion has a big gorgeous for a day and doesn't eat for a few more days. So that's the world of the cheetah, and we probably capitalized on that world of the cheetah. That's how we became the scavengers, and we probably did it for dogs. And here, the only reason that we probably don't have we have dogs in our homes and not cheetahs is because cheetahs don't breed well in captivity.
Right.
That's it. It's right there. But cats do. But cats are pretty much worthless if you want to go hunt something besides mice.
Right.
Okay. Not all cats are very good mousers. We had our house cat. There was a mouse outside the door. His dad, and I gave credit to the cat, but I'm not exactly sure the cat did it. Okay?
I have a cat that'll just sit there and let the mouse run by. So
yeah, so I'm like, they're not all good mousers. I think he found something, he played with it, and he brought it to the back door.
Right.
Okay, I think that's how it went down. Because I don't seem like chasing anything else, or really on the hunt, or all that sort of stuff. So as a hypothesis, going back, and this is George and the anthropologist, is they came to the conclusion that in the absence of long-range projectiles, we were scavenging off these other animals. Yeah. And then what happens is we go to Europe. Okay. Now here's something interesting about these pelvic cave images. There's one of them actually shows one end of the panel, they're European animals, and the other end has African animals, and there's a body of water in the middle with marine animals. There's a great auk, there's a bird, now extinct bird, there's a monk seal, there's a crab, there's a dolphin, and a whale. Okay. So the separation of the body of water, North Africa and Iberian Peninsula, now Spain.
Yeah.
There's dogs with their ears down on the African side of this panel. Therefore, we became partners, I would say, with dogs before we left Africa.
Okay. All right.
So it makes complete sense. So we knew how to partner with an animal before we encountered Neanderthals. Neanderthals that lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, very successful. We show up 40,000 years ago, and all of a sudden, within a few thousand years, the ones that didn't mix with us are gone.
Yeah.
Well, Neanderthals, there's no evidence that they had dogs, not even they ate dogs. What I think happened is that we brought the dogs that we had partnered and ultimately by that time domesticated, because they were, we brought them to Europe as partners. We found more dogs there that were so-called wild. We partnered with them. We became alpha hunting partners. We became the ultimate hunting weapon, and probably the ultimate weapon of war against Neanderthals. Because have you ever done any big game hunting?
No.
Okay. Well, you're not allowed to hunt with a dog in the United States. Okay. Except some places you can hunt bears with dogs. Out here in Oregon, it's illegal. Or some places you can hunt cougars with dogs, and the dogs actually run the cougar up the tree. It doesn't actually kill the cougar, and they don't kill the bears either. But most places, it's actually illegal to hunt with dogs. And the reason is not because anybody's afraid of hurting the cougar or the bears. It's because it's not considered fair chase.
Ah.
Okay. You could walk through the woods, and you've actually probably walked through the woods.
Yes, I have walked through the woods.
Many times you walk through the woods, and you've walked by deer, and they just jumped out at you. Mm-hmm. And the only reason that you saw the deer is that because they jumped. Mm-hmm. Well, if you had a dog, it wasn't going to take that long for you to see those deer. Okay. And so it's not considered fair chase to hunt with a dog, because you can actually if you're hunting with a rifle, you miss a shot, the deer runs away, your dog can run after the deer, the deer is panting away, you get another shot at it 10 minutes later. It's illegal.
I did not know that.
Yeah, you can hunt waterfowl and upland birds, chukar, grouse, pheasants, all that sort of stuff. But so remember that when next time you go hunting, you're not allowed to bring your dog. Okay?
Which will be never.
Never again. So anyway, it's illegal, not considered fair chase, and the reason is because it gives us an advantage over the animal. that we're actually hunting. It's a pretty big deal. Out here in Oregon, you're allowed to hunt, at least I'm not sure what the rules are this year, but historically you've been allowed to hunt cougars with dogs. And you get a lottery, they give like 10 out, 20 out per year passes. And everybody who has a dog knows how to hunt a cougar, they get a cougar. The cougar runs up the tree, they shoot him with a handgun. And for a few years, it was banned in Oregon. And then a huge movement came out that cougars were, predation on the bus stops, the little kids waiting, all that sort of stuff, and which wasn't true. No kid at a bus stop ever got mauled by a cougar. Right. But anyway, it reversed the laws. So back to dogs. So what we've kind of established so far, or we can propose, is we can say that dogs didn't come from wolves. Dogs came from a common ancestor to the wolves. Okay. Right. We can say that we scavenged off of the dogs and the cheetah, and that probably helped us to have more brain food. Okay. And then somewhere along the line, we became partners with the dogs in the same way that we became these, sultans in the Middle East became partners with their cheetahs. Mm-hmm. I'm not exactly sure that that's the right word, but we'll go with it. And so it's a completely different narrative on how we became successful. And everywhere we traveled around the world from that point, we had dogs.
Yeah. Okay.
Everywhere. And so we became this phenomenal hunting machine, which of course is illegal in our modern day. Okay. So are you with me so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any questions?
Well, I mean, so you have the standard theory, and even though you have this evidence, is that accepted by archaeologists?
So is it accepted by archaeologists? And there's this idea out there that is mainstream archaeology, right? This orthodoxy and all that sort of stuff. Well, the archaeologists are all over the board. Oh, sure. So do archaeologists see what I'm seeing? Archaeologists who work in these caves, who study these images, now see what I'm seeing? The answer is yes. Okay. Are they now working in the direction of this different theory about dogs? Absolutely not, because the archaeologists who work in the caves, they're cave focused, they're not dog focused. Interesting. So by being outside of the cave and looking at all the pieces of the puzzle, I'm sort of moving, I'm ahead of the game. And also, I also through the writing of the book and the research, I had a few years ahead, right? Okay. Yeah. And that helps. But yeah, absolutely. So anyway, they see the same images. So go back to the images of the caves, and what are the dogs? Did you ever have a dog?
Yes.
What kind of dog?
I've had boxers, I've had collie, I've had a lab.
Boxer, collie, and a lab.
And a white Pyrenees.
Oh, a white Pyrenees. So when you're talking white Pyrenees, you're talking an old dog.
Yeah.
That's an old dog. So I tell you a story. My daughter, she's now off in college. She's 18. It was about 5 years ago. I gave her all the images of these dogs, and I had her go through 3 dog books. And she looked through all the books, and she found, this one looks like that. She says, but Dad, most of these dogs are in the front of this book. So I looked in the front of the book, and it was like, these are like the oldest dogs. And she wasn't thinking along this line, because she actually didn't even know the age of the cave. She just, these images. By the way, the Pyrenees was one of the dogs in the beginning of the book. I remember that. Wow. Okay. So anyway, some of these dog, because the people who study dogs are all over the board. I mean, they're wildlife people, they're archaeologists, they're anthropologists. You name it, they're out there. Someone had asked the question, because this whole domesticating the wolf thing doesn't make any sense. They said, well, so how did we breed dogs to something we didn't know that they could be? So the Pyrenees has long hair, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you talk Pyrenees of the mountains in France, you've got to have a dog with long hair as opposed to a Chihuahua, right, which had short hair would freeze in the Pyrenees. So wolves don't have hair like a Pyrenees. How would someone even know to breed the dog the wolf dog in that direction if they didn't know what could be?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. So here's another hypothesis. I'm a Darwinist, okay? I don't agree with everything Charles Darwin said and how he got there, but as a fundamental concept, I believe that natural selection explains the variation in species.
Okay.
Okay. And so chimp to man, all this sort of stuff, there's a little blurry area. I'm okay with that. But there's natural selection. So let's say they were Pyrenees dogs like the Pyrenees that lived in the Pyrenees that had, through natural selection, had adapted to those conditions.
Okay.
It would look like a Pyrenees.
Yeah.
It wouldn't look like a Chihuahua. Okay. Let's say there was a dog in the Sahara, and the dog. If you have a slow dog in the Sahara, the dog's not going to eat. You have to have a dog that can run down a gazelle. Otherwise, it's not going to get any meat. Okay. So the dogs of the Sahara, like the Slohi, the Aswan, or the Aswan Slohi, and these are fast dogs. And the people in the Sahara still use them to run down gazelle, and then, they've worked out their deal. They actually bump them down because they can't grab them by the neck, or they bump the gazelle down, the gazelle trips, and then they're on top of it. So in the Sahara, we have these long-legged dogs, something like the Aswan Slohi, something like a greyhound, which would not survive in the Pyrenees because it's too cold.
Yeah.
So as you go, we're going to go through some of these dogs that we find in the images. One of them is the Aswan Slohi. Okay. Another one is a canary dog. So you have a boxer. It's possible that a boxer originates some distant point back in time for canary dog. So if you can imagine a boxer that's 200 pounds, okay, that's a big nasty dog.
Right.
And that would be a canary dog, which are off the coast, the Atlantic coast of Morocco. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking that we have an image of a canary dog. Actually, there's 3 of them, and they are geographically within, today by boat, a few hours. Okay, in the Canary Islands. And we have the Aswan Slohi, which is across the Strait of Gibraltar from Spain, where these images, and Gibraltar, a few hours across into the Sahara Desert. Very close proximity. Another one, this odd-looking dog. It looks like a Majorcan shepherd dog. Have you ever seen one?
No.
Yeah, I've never seen one in the real world either. Because again, it's one of those dogs that Majorcan Islands are off of the Mediterranean side of Spain, and it's a local dog. Hasn't gone very far, very much like the canary dogs. And so we have these dogs they're isolated on their own islands in that same part of the world. The Canary Islands for the canary dogs, the Slohi, the Aswan Slohi, the Sahara, which is like its own island, and the Majorcan shepherd dogs. And so the reasons we still have those dogs there today that haven't changed from the images is because they were isolated. Interesting. Right. And they also were they found their own conditions in those places that made them successful. Like the Pyrenees. And another one, in the El Castillo cave, we have the Spitz-like dog. And you've seen Spitz dogs. They have their tail is flat towards on their back. Okay. And so Akita is a Spitz dog, which is in Spain, and in Japan. Akita Inu, those sort of Spitz. And then we have a Swiss looks like a Swiss mountain dog. Again, like the Pyrenees, it's a geographically isolated area. So you have a dog that's working high in the mountains. This dog has lots of fur, lots of hair, and it holds a lot of weight. Now, what's interesting about all these different dogs you just mentioned is their muzzles are all completely different.
Yeah.
So the difference between the Pyrenees and a boxer dog is the difference between a bottle of Coke and a 6-pack of Coke.
Right.
I mean, that's the difference in terms of the shape.
Yeah, definitely.
And so we have these shapes so far of the muzzles so far back in time, which suggest that there's a natural selection that created those environmental conditions that were most conducive for those dogs to live in those places. And as we came to those places and encountered those dogs, we then learned how to partner with the dogs.
How long back would it be for that type of selection to happen? Like, how old would dogs have to be as a separate breed?
So the study, the Scopland study, he found that at the earliest point in time, the dog diverged from this came from this mother canid 27,000 years ago, and as far back as 40,000 years ago. So in his range, you've got about 10,000. We've got 10,000 years. Now, there's other DNA studies that suggest that dogs go back 100,000 years ago. So what they're saying in those studies, they're saying there's multiple origins of the domesticated dog. So it could be tens of thousands of years, but it all depends on which dog you pick up, how long ago it had diverged from that common ancestor, or multiple common ancestors, because there could be everything didn't come from this one the ancestor of the Siberian wolf, or the common ancestor, because there could have been other common ancestors across in Africa and Europe and Eurasia. And so the genetic data says the possibilities out there for tens of thousands of years. So how long does it take? I don't know. But here's an interesting analogy. In Paleolithic cave art, we have horses. In fact, if you ever see Paleolithic cave art, the most common image you'll see is a horse.
Right.
Okay. And a lot of those horses, you see all different kinds of horses. You have Celtic, Siberians. You have strains that look like a Przewalski's horse, which is like what Genghis Khan rode. Looks like kind of a doggish face. Horses that look like Arabian strain. You have a wide range of horses. So, and those horses weren't domesticated until about, as far as we know, as best we know, about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. That's not that long ago.
No.
Okay. And so if horses could have evolved all those different breeds, some of them still exist today. Why couldn't dogs have done the same thing?
No,
and all those
fair
different
enough.
those different varieties of the horses are suitable for their natural conditions where they were. Okay, so this Przewalski's horse is kind of it's about 2/3 the size of an Arabian strain, and they count these things in hands. And it's stocky. It's got a kind of flat muzzle. It's perfect for it'd be equivalent of like a dog. It's like it's the Swiss mountain dog of the dogs. It's compact. It doesn't run very far. It doesn't run very fast. It's a high mountain grazer. Okay. And so you have these features of these dogs that depict these horses that depict in Paleolithic cave art, that there's such a wide range, just as we find now in these images of the dogs. So it's possible through natural selection, as Darwin would have said. They evolved in their own ways, and we capitalized on the natural selection.
So when we look at like 12,000 years ago, when the Ice Age suddenly ended and we had that sort of cataclysmic break, how much would that have affected the diversity of dogs?
Very little. So you're talking about the Younger Dryas, all that sort of stuff, right?
Right, and the end of the Younger Dryas as well, where the sea level rose.
Yeah. So there's comic. Have you ever had the comic impact people on your program?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me tell you something about comic. So there may or may not have been a comet impact, but if there was, it would have nothing to do with anything to do with human beings. So what happened? Here's in the Paleolithic cave art ends about 12,000 years ago in Europe, which is synchronous actually to the what they're saying is the comet impact.
Right.
But you know what happens? Less than 100 miles away, it explodes 12,000 years ago. It explodes in the Greater Sahara area.
Okay.
The people migrated across the Strait of Gibraltar into West North Africa and now Morocco. And that's why there was a shift in population in Europe. Because what happened 12,000 years ago is the Sahara greened.
Yes.
Prior to 12,000 years ago, the Sahara, for let's say 20,000 years, the Sahara was arid. 12,000 years ago, lakes explode. Lakes larger than the Great Lakes of the United States explode in the Sahara. They're now below ground, and people tap that water for the cities in the Sahara region. Okay, so there was no decimation of people due to any comets. But what did happen is that the resources became better in the Greater Sahara region than they did in Europe. So there are fewer people in Europe at that time. So none of this stuff needs to be explained by a comet, and maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. Okay. What also happened 12,000 years ago is we have the advent of agriculture, and that's part of the whole Göbekli Tepe story. That about that time, agriculture emerges, and people moved across the Mediterranean region into Europe, and they become agriculturists. And when agriculturists move into the area, just as white guys from Europe came into the United States, how'd that work for the hunter-gatherer Native Americans?
Yeah, not well.
Yeah, it didn't work. Yeah, it didn't work well. Exactly. That's the most political way to say it. And so the same thing probably happened in Europe at that time when agriculturists moved into Europe. And at the same time, good for the hunter-gatherers and the cave artists and their people is that the Sahara was like South Africa today, huge lakes. There's elephants roaming around and giraffes and everything else you could possibly imagine. Great hunting opportunities. Those lakes dried up, or actually they dried up and seeped below the ground about 6,000 years ago. And right. Then the people migrated east or west. And going west, they went into Morocco, and going east, they went into the Nile Delta.
Okay.
And so the Nile, the ancient Egyptian peoples were populated by people across these wetlands that dried up and moved into the people moved into the Nile. Okay, so there could have been a comet impact, maybe not, but it has no relevance at all to the people and their migration, because they only moved 100 miles or so across the Strait of Gibraltar into Western North Africa.
Right. But I think the Sahara greened because of the meltdown of the Ice Age.
Well, actually, so people, you've had people on your program talk about precession, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And when they talk about precession, they're talking about Hamlet's mill and people that tell time back thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And well, here's actually precession is a wobbling of the Earth on its axis. And what happens is when it wobbles that appears as there's more sunlight and less sunlight in specific areas. And what happened 12,000 years ago, and in that wobble, it changed how much sunlight came to the Earth and how far the monsoons that are currently in Central Africa could move into North Africa. Okay, so not just the Earth's moving, but the monsoons are moving. So what happened is the monsoons were able to move further north because there was less sunlight in that region, and they drenched the Sahara. It's going to happen again in about 5,000 years, which will prove actually, that's not my hypothesis, but the climatologists, people who study these things, will be proven again 5,000 years. So here's a good land buy tip, realty, buy in the Sahara.
Yeah. And in 5,000 years,
you got to hold it for 5,000 years, but it's going to be pretty sweet in 5,000 years. Okay. So the precession is important. The younger dry ice is important, but I believe that the precession, which the climatologist, how that works, precession created the monsoon rains over the Sahara, which drenched them, made huge lakes, as large as the Great Lakes, which made the great hunting conditions for these phenomenal, formerly bison, reindeer hunters in the Iberian Peninsula.
Okay.
They brought back these incredible skills that they had fine-tuned. So I have debunked 3 things tonight. 1, dogs come from wolves. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the concept that we rescued wolf cubs, either one of those, dog the rescue. Okay. We've also thrown out the why comet impacts have had this huge influence on us as human beings. It sounds great. You're looking for, you can just as well say God did, okay? And the third one is, what does precession really mean? And how has it affected us on Earth? It's not about only a time, cave art, or whatever, Hamlet's Mill thousands of years back. It's about how it's changed the climate on our Earth. Climate change is real. And whether you believe it by humans or by the natural circumstances, climate change is real,
right.
And it's continuing to happen in a very big way. So, you got any questions?
Not at this point. How do we tie this all back into the dog story?
So we're going to talk back into the dog side. So we have these images in the Paleolithic caves. And we have the canary dog, the Aswan Slowsly, the Majorcan shepherd dogs. We have a Spitz-like dog. We have wolfish type of canines, Swiss mountain dogs. And so we have dogs. We have these wide range of dogs with different muzzles going back in time. And then we encountered those dogs. We mixed and matched those dogs. Mm-hmm. And those dogs, what we also need to do is, there's this funny thing about dogs. When dogs meet other dogs, they do their thing, right? If you are going to have a breed of dogs, the last thing you want to do is have that whatever the heck dog down the street come mix with yours.
Right.
So probably happened is we killed off all the dogs, or so-called, let's say, wild dogs.
Okay.
We probably slaughtered them, and we probably used our own dogs to do it. Because if you ever go like into like some village in Africa or wherever in the Caribbean, all dogs start to look the same. Because when you stop breeding dogs with whatever strain you want them to be in some moderate climate area that they're being fed, they just sort of become this something like a let me think, what would it look like? It'd be like 2/3 the size of a German Shepherd, ears up, and kind of patchy brown.
Okay.
And that would be described a village dog pretty much everywhere in the world, and a dog that is keeps mixing with other dogs and doesn't have a specific breed. So we probably wiped out all the other dogs out there that didn't have that breed. Okay. So here's we're going to do a thought experiment. And we're going to take you and your Pyrenees dog, and we're going to send you in separate directions out in the woods. And I'm going to give you a Swiss Army knife. I'm going to give you a pack of matches. And I'm going to give you a bottle to put the water in, okay? And you're going to go off in one direction for a week, and your dog's going to go off in another direction for a week. How are you going to be feeling at the end of that week, you personally?
Pretty awful, probably.
You're going to be dehydrated because you're going to can I use the D word? Yeah, you're going to have you have the D word, diarrhea. You dehydrate, diarrhea, and you'll probably try to, at some point, you're going to eat leaves or something, and you eat the wrong leaves. Now, your Pyrenees dog, how do you think that how do you think he or she's going to have done?
I'm guessing she'll have done fine.
It's like a vacation for the dog.
Right.
So the dog misses you. Dog might meet some other dogs. The dog's going to eat, dead stuff. It's going to eat dead birds. Probably ain't going to kill any birds, but definitely going to eat some dead birds. Might catch a mouse, a rat, or it might even feed off, whatever the bear left behind, and what you can find. And your dog could have drank it right out of the stream, which you can't.
Right.
Okay. And so you got a bottle of water. You can fill it up, but you're just gonna get sick. You can't boil it because you have nothing to boil it in. Okay.
Right.
So even if you did figure out a way to boil the water, all the energy you're putting into that, you didn't get any food. Okay. And so, maybe there's blackberries out there, and that'll keep you sugared up for a few days. But that's about it. You're gonna come back. You can lose a few pounds. You're gonna be dehydrated, and they're gonna put an IV in you right away. Mm-hmm. And your dog's gonna just come over and lick you and be happy to see you. Yeah. And so why if dogs are like that, why do dogs need us?
Well, because we've pushed them to be dependent on us.
Because we've pushed exactly what happened. But I believe there was also in this alpha partnership with the hunting of the dogs, is that we could do something. Now, in the wild, dogs don't have a very high survival rate. Okay? I always say, so that first, when dogs get old, they just can't hunt. Okay, and the dog pups have a very, very low survival. And so what we did was, a dog has, how many pups does a dog have?
Not offhand.
Like 8 or something, right? Okay, is a lot. So let's say a dog has 8 pups. We might decide 2 more runs and they're gone. There's still 6 pups left. And in the wild, that dog was not going to have their 6 pups raised to maturity. There's just no way. Okay. And so what we did for the dog is that we secured its young. We fed the mother, and we had created a greater population of dogs than it would have been in the wild.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So we created this partnership with the dogs that we never could have done with the cheetahs, because cheetahs don't breed well in captivity, and that helped us, and it helped the dogs.
Yeah.
And then what happened over time is, you've seen these studies that, dogs look at our eyes and the eye contact and all that sort of stuff. Then over thousands of years, we bred out characteristics of the dogs that were not beneficial for our mutual benefit, for our mutual, what we needed to do.
Right.
So we to some degree, we never bred out aggression in dogs, because you've had some pretty aggressive dogs bark at you. What we've done is we bred out the concept of the dogs is aggressive to everybody.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And so that was the deal that the dogs got out of it, and that's why there's so many more dogs in Siberia. There's a lot of wolves, but there's not that many wolves. Any city has 10,000 times more dogs than there are wolves in Siberia, even as big as it is. And so what happened was, we created effectively puppy mills by breeding dogs that we could protect them. And then also what we did was, this is something the dogs can't do, and something the cheetahs couldn't do either, is that when a dog made a kill, they could eat it until a bigger predator came along.
Right.
So bears, hyenas, it could be in Africa, hyenas, lions at that time were in both Europe and Africa, and cougars, which in North America. So the dogs that we became alpha partners with got more food, because we could protect the food from the bigger predators. And then what we probably did is, remember I mentioned these canary dogs, these huge dogs, like 200-pound boxers, but with like a real jaw. They probably became the dogs that we protected the food with. In ancient Babylon and Sumer, they used the equivalent of a canary dog to fight lions in the ring, and actually to hunt lions as well. So there is why do you need such a huge dog? The dog's not going to do any good hunting for you, because it's not fast enough.
Right.
But you can use it to protect your family and your food and the other dogs. So why we have these mix of dogs on these panels, maybe because they had multiple breeds of dogs that they utilized for different things.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So here's an interesting story. Hercules visits Hades. He goes to Hades on one of his labors, and he's supposed to tame the Cerberus, or something like the Cerberus, the 3-headed dog. And I've never seen a 3-headed dog. I'm pretty sure the Greeks never saw a 3-headed dog either. So where do they get the idea from? Well, in one of these cave images, you have 3 overlapping dogs, and these are the canary dogs. And so you have the body of effectively one, and you have the heads behind it, because the dogs are actually next. They're depicted as next to each other, but in a one-dimensional image, they look like they're on top. Well, I believe that three-headed dog image is what became the Cerberus of Hercules.
That's interesting.
Now, in the same cave panel, there's two dogs, actually the Aswan and Slohi, that overlap with each other. And in one of the earlier labors of Hercules, he slays Orthros, which is the two-headed dog.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that one.
Exactly. Orthros is also depicted, is actually considered the same as the star Sirius. Have you ever had anybody on that talked about the Dogon and Sirius B and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. I've had Laird Scranton on numerous times.
Smart guy. This is what I believe the source of the Dogon Sirius B is that in this Paleolithic cave panel, you actually have this human-like character, and he is the constellation Orion. Okay, and you can work back the stars on his body to the flanks of this Aswan Slohi dog, which actually has the stars on the side of the body. Okay, it has two stars, and actually the stars overlap with each other, so it's like 3D. So what you have is you have this Orion type character, and you have these Aswan Slohi dogs, the star on the flanks, and the Aswan Slohi dogs are one in back of the other. Would give the impression that there's either two-headed dog, or the dog has a pair. There's a pair of dogs.
Okay.
So let's say someone who had intercepted with the Dogon, and they saw this image. They would say, well, there must be, if Sirius is the dog, then there's two dogs. Therefore, there must be two stars.
So you think it was just coincidental?
I think it's complete coincidence, like 100% coincidence. Now, if you've gone to my webpage and you see I do a lot of astronomy presentations, kind of to astrophysicists and stuff, and I go through the images, and I show that the ancient Greeks had lifted their entire constellation record from these Paleolithic cave images. And the same animals and the same order that the Greeks had their constellations. So the Greek constellation record goes back to at least 34,000 years. Okay, and people can argue, well, maybe this one is this, maybe it was that. But if I've got I have the exact same animals in the exact same order, same animals and animal beings and human beings, the same order as the Greeks had them, and I can actually show that I can use a Starry Night Pro, it's an astronomy program. I can show it on the screen that they're exactly in the same places at the same time, and it can do 34,000 years ago by turning it back. Okay, so Orthros in Greek mythology was Sirius, and it's a two-headed dog. Hercules kills the two-headed dog as he tames the Cerberus, and it's in the exact same place as Canis Major is, and the stars on the flanks of these dogs are in the same as where we would find Sirius, and Sirius B would then be the second dog. It actually is a male in the fore and a female in the back. So we resolved, where does Sirius B come from? What
about Native Americans and stuff? Where did the dog come from in that case?
Native Americans came from Siberia, and they brought the dogs with them. But here's an interesting thing. I do it in slideshows, and I start off. I say that there are three constellations that people see around the world. One of them is Orion as a hunter or hero. So not everybody sees it, but you can find it on all the continents.
Right.
But Orion kind of looks like a man, right? I mean, you can look at the sky and okay, that's a man. Okay. So you can't say that Orion, the constellation, through the myths or knowledge of people, traveled around the world because it looks like a man. Okay. So Ursa Major is the next one. So Ursa Major looks like a legged animal, and so in the Inuits look at it, they say it's a reindeer, and in the ancient Greeks said it was the she bear, and Native Americans in the northeast United States, there's a culture or tradition that Ursa Major is a she bear, and you might have heard that story. Okay. And there's other places in the world that you find Ursa major as a she-bear, but typically as a legged animal, meaning that it looks like a legged animal. Okay, so we can kind of mark that one off and say, hey, you know, that doesn't show that people travel around the world and carry the constellation. Okay, so the next one is the Pleiades. Okay, and the Pleiades in North America. I don't know about South America. North America, Asia, and Europe, and Africa, we find the Pleiades recognized as a group of people. Okay. Well, but actually, kind of, you know, if Orion is your hunter and you got Pleiades just above, and it's recognized as a group of people or a group of women that Orion's chasing. Okay, so then you back to this concept that Orion looks like a man is chasing a group of women. Okay, human nature. But then what you find is Sirius as a canid, whether it be a wolf or a dog, and it's more commonly found than Orion as a hunter.
Really?
So the question, in China, they don't recognize Orion as a hunter, but they recognize Sirius as the wolf dog. Interesting. So how the heck why do these people around the world, not everybody, but why do so many different cultures recognize Sirius as a canid?
No idea.
Because it goes back so far back in time that they've intersected out of Africa when it was one of the original constellations. So as people travel around the world, we brought our dogs with us. We didn't bring bears everywhere. We didn't bring horses everywhere, and all these other kinds. So Pegasus, of course, is the horse. We didn't bring. And when we went some places, you had reindeer, and decided that looked more like Ursa Major. So we had all these constellations that didn't make sense everywhere we went, because we found new animals that made more sense in the night sky that told of their seasons of the year. But we always had the dog with us. That's
really interesting.
So I believe that so Orion is, it's, as I say, it looks like a man. It's not definitive. Legged animal for Ursa Major, but Sirius doesn't look like anything except the brightest star in the night sky.
Right.
I mean, why not make it your cat, right?
Right. And speaking of that, when did cats domesticate us?
So I'm not an expert on cats. As I spoke earlier, I have some research on cheetahs. But the belief is that cats came into our world when we became agriculturists, and they became guardians of the greenery.
Huh.
That's the belief. But there are feral not feral cats. So there are cats that have never been domesticated throughout all parts of the world.
Really?
Yeah, and so that's a concept. Cats don't come from, a lion or something that we tamed.
Right.
I think it's just the same thing. Dogs from wolves. It just didn't happen. But yeah, there are cats all around the world that never been domesticated, and so yes, it's believed to go back to the point that we needed them, or it was beneficial for them to hang around with us. But I'm not exactly sure if any cat is actually domesticated.
Yeah, well, that's why I said, when did they domesticate us?
Yeah, because years ago, so I'm out in Oregon, and there's this place in Central Oregon. Central Oregon is high desert, it's arid, okay. And a friend spent the winter out there at a camp, a research camp, and they decided that didn't want to bring the cat home and let the cat, the person was going to come back the next winter, so let the cat go. And there were rumors that people heard the cat. And 7 months later, this person came back, a researcher, and the cat just walked into the cabin. Lo and behold, people had seen, there was rumor, there was myth, all that sort of stuff. So the cat did just fine out there, not being fed, eating whatever the heck the cat could find. And this is a place of rattlesnakes and cougars and like real predators. And so the cats can go wild, feral, whatever the story is, all by themselves. And dogs can do it to some degree, but we don't. We're more likely to allow cats to run free than we want to have dogs run around the neighborhood.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Sure. Yeah. So that's it. That's that's a good point about the cats. We have a house cat. The cat didn't come with me. Cat's furry and it's nice and listens usually when I'm on the phone or a podcast or scratching on the door or something. So someone's holding that cat back right now somewhere. But yeah, so we've covered some ground, haven't we? We talked about the Dogon. We talked about the Younger Dryas and the Comet and the Cirrus B and procession, an important concept, different perspective. And we also talked about us traveling around the world with dogs. And dogs changed as whatever dogs we took over when we lived in Beringia, those dogs changed, shed some of that hair by the time they got down to Mexico over thousands of years.
Right.
So yeah, it's an important concept and makes us rethink who we are as a species. Are we really so smart? So clever, so fast, and all these things that we think we are. Could we have done it without our best friend?
And I've seen reports that the Neanderthals may have been actually considerably smarter than us, and there's some puzzle as to how we wiped them out.
Oh, absolutely. I believe this is one of the reasons. Neanderthals' brains, well, actually, the area in their skulls is where you could have a brain is much larger than ours. Okay. But there was this case of this fellow, and I can't remember the name, and he had some sort of brain injury. They brought him in, and then they opened up his skull, and they found that the mass of his brain was 10% of what yours is.
Right. It was all liquid.
It's all liquid, yeah.
Yeah, it's happened a few times.
Yeah, and so the question then became, and this person, he lived normally, had family, kids, job, the whole thing. The question then became, well, if this guy was only using 10% of his brain, then what are we doing with the rest 90%?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when people say that, so this is for all the listeners out there, when people say that we only using 10% in your brain, it goes back to that guy. The first guy that they found only had 10%. It wasn't like dense matter. It wasn't, the Big Bang sort of thing. It was, there just wasn't a lot there. And so it asked the question, how much intelligence do we have in our brain, and how much do we actually use? And
what's the brain really for? And
what's the brain really for? Well, they say it's not holding consciousness. So what the heck is our brain doing if this guy functioned? I mean, he was a completely normal person.
Yes, yeah. There was a case where the guy was actually hyper smart. He had gotten into an accident and died. And when they did the autopsy, when they were trying to save him, they realized, oh, this guy has no brain. It's all liquid. And they came out to the parents and they said, we're very sad to tell you of the loss of your very special man. And they were like, very special man? What does that mean? And they said, well, he must have been very much impaired. And they said he was a genius. Yeah, so the whole thing. So this is so you actually brought up Neanderthals. That's a good one. Okay, so actually in my book Before Ryan, people go to the webpage, they can see more about it. I talked a lot about Neanderthals. Now this is what Neanderthals didn't have, and Neanderthals did not have art. Okay, and you will see places that say Neanderthal first abstract art, all this sort of stuff. It's complete nonsense. Okay, and I tell you it's nonsense because it's the Gorham's Cave where they say they have this abstract art of the Neanderthal, which is actually the same place that I find the dogs and other animals. And and the whole study was fraudulent, and it continues to be so in what they're doing. And the people, the archaeologists who are involved in the project have actually walked away from it, and is a very small number of people who are non-archaeologists who are pursuing this abstract art of Neanderthal stuff. Okay. Really?
So we actually have it was controversial before I got involved in it, but I just sort of I put the last nail in the coffin. There is no evidence that Neanderthals made art. Zero at all. But Neanderthals were in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, looking at the same thing we were. How come they didn't see art? Mm-hmm. So give me a theory.
I don't know. It's
So
also
Picasso,
possible. It's also possible we haven't found it. I mean, we find so small amount of what's actually out there. I mean, it's only the stuff that survives, and the older it gets, the less we're going to find.
Possible. Okay. Have you ever hear of pareidolia?
Yeah.
Okay, so have you ever anyone in your program that sees the face in Mars, all that sort of stuff?
Sure.
Yeah, we're hitting them all, aren't we? Okay. And so the face in Mars, there is no face in Mars, but people do see the face in Mars, and that is normal. Okay? And there's no question about that. When you might look at the clouds and see faces, that's called pareidolia. And it's really important because it allows us to see art. Okay, so we can see absolutely abstract art and understand and walk away to think that it's art. So let's consider this. I'm going to tell you what Picasso said about the origins of art. And Picasso said, I'm going to pull up the actual quote. Picasso said, well, I don't actually have the right quote in front of me, but Picasso said that man first looked at the rocks and he first looked at the cave walls, and he saw a line, and from that line he extended it, and that's how art was created. Okay, so he saw glimpses of images in the rock and in stone, and might be the shape of a stone, and then he improved upon it to make it look something real. Okay, so what Picasso is saying is that ancient man or Paleolithic man used his pareidolia to take it one step further. Okay, he made his vision of what is not there into something that is there. So when he looked at the face of a mountain, and a lot of mountains, the ridge line looks like faces, right? It's a thing.
Sure.
Or he looked at the clouds. He saw faces. He then took that when he traveled to places that he couldn't no longer see those mountains or see those rocks. He redrew them where he was, because in the places where they started from, they were his equivalent of the gods, because they were animists. There people believe that the gods, the mountains and the rocks had spirits, and the rivers and everything else. So when he traveled, he recreated those on his journey, and that became the first art. And I can actually prove that, and how I can prove it is that there are geological images in Africa. Actually, they're geologically formed, so they're not like real images, right?
Right.
But they're recreated in Iberian Spanish cave art. Okay, and so it's actually the proof to the test. And what Picasso believed was that art itself existed before we actually recreated what was in the geological or meteorological world.
Interesting.
Yes, right. And Picasso, here it is, a Picasso quote, though. It is not sufficient to know an artist's works. It is also necessary to know when he did them, why, how, and under what circumstances. Someday, there will undoubtedly be a science. It may be called the science of man, which is anthropology, right? Okay. Which will seek to learn more about man in general through the study of creative man, meaning Picasso. I often think about such a science, and I want to leave to posterity a documentation that will be as complete as possible. That's why I put a date in everything I do. Now, Picasso is famous not for what he did before 1906, but what he did after that. His first Cubism work was called Les Dames d'Avignon in 1907. And you have these masks on these two women. It's kind of ghoulish. Mm-hmm. Those two masks came from the Altamira cave. And what they are in the Altamira cave is they're two natural irregularities, geological irregularities in the rock that the cave artists put eyes and mouths on. Picasso lifted them exactly as they were from that cave, and he put them into the two characters in Les Dames d'Avignon, and they're both considered to be the mares, okay, in the painting, okay, and in the cave art, the cave images, they have the faces of kind of a mare, okay, horse, female horse, and so Picasso is saying that art existed, and then we recognized it. But it didn't become art in our sense until we actually transformed it. So when the Paleolithic cave artists used charcoal to create the eyes and the mouths on those irregularities, that became the art. But it was before them. It was the spirit of the rock that looked like the mare, so the horse's hips.
Right. Huh.
And so that's a different. So what Neanderthals probably didn't have was either the ability to see the pareidolia that they couldn't see, because some people have like injuries and they can't see pareidolia. It's a thing.
Right.
And so maybe they didn't have that ability. Or here's another hypothesis, is they had the ability, but they didn't travel very far, because they actually didn't travel very far, whereas we traveled long distances in a matter of a few years. And because they didn't travel very far, they didn't recreate it on their journeys, because it was their sacred in that moment.
Okay. All right.
So two possibilities. My guess is, number one, is they didn't have that brain capability, or not. Some people would say it's brain. You're crazy, right? But it's not crazy. In fact, there's we've heard of the schizophrenics. So they see a demon in every bush. The clouds are attacking them and all that sort of stuff. I don't think they're crazy. I feel for all the families that have people with mental illness in their homes, and how they support them. I don't think these people are crazy. I think that they have a stronger ability, and that allows them to see things that you and I normally wouldn't see. Just as some people can't see any pareidolia, a lot of people see pareidolia everywhere. And that becomes a demon jumping out of every bush. And that's a horrible way to live your life. And it's out of the norm. It's on the bell curve. It's like way out there. It's an outlier. But I believe that in our distant past, more people had that ability. And we over time weeded it out of the system. And that's a thing. And as I say, I feel for every family that has mental illness, but it's maybe there has to be a reason why there's mental illness. And you start thinking about some of the greatest artists of all time, Van Gogh, right? He did his best works when he was at the highest point of his mental illness, and months before he killed himself.
Right.
And he's not the only one. And so there's and some people they do drugs, hallucinogenic drugs, to try to achieve that same place. Okay.
Sure.
And so is it, I believe that we at a distant point in time, tens of thousands of years ago, that was more the norm. Or if it wasn't the norm, it was what one aspired to be, because you couldn't be a Paleolithic cave artist unless you can do that.
True. What are your thoughts on Göbekli Tepe? I mean, it is a fairly advanced structure to have just popped up like that.
Well, if you look at Göbekli Tepe 10 and 12,000 years ago, right? Okay, and so there's two things that are interesting about it. One is that you actually have these pillars, right? And so that's why we don't have earlier stone structures. Okay. So that's kind of interesting. We'll probably find some more over time. In fact, they're actually digging up more in Turkey right now. Right. That doesn't. Now the other question is the amazing artwork. Well, the reliefs, they're okay. Compared to this Paleolithic cave images 34,000 years ago, which means 24,000 years ago, 30,000 years before Göbekli Tepe, you have incredible artwork. If you compare in these cave images to Göbekli Tepe would be like a third grader, and this is a master's in fine arts. That's the difference. So am I so astounded by the art itself? Not really, because the cave art, these cave artists 34,000 years ago are like the bus left the station in Seattle, and is going to Miami, and Göbekli Tepe is Atlanta.
Okay, all right.
Relative concept, and so I'm not so I think it's cool that we had bigger structures, but Stonehenge. So you're talking 6,000 years old in Stonehenge, right? Okay.
At least, yeah.
Yes, at least 6, 7 days. But so we're not really. Is it so amazing? I'm not so sure. So the question then becomes: you ask me now, what do I think it is?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on it?
Okay, so number one is the so-called vulture stone. It's not a vulture. Okay, there's no vulture that looks like that. And so, if it's not a vulture, what is it? And it's not it's not any other bird that we have in the current ornithological record, or anything we have fossils or anything like that. You can't identify that bird in any possible way, and it sure as heck ain't a vulture. Okay. So if it isn't any bird that we recognize, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a mix of two different things. What we do find in the Paleolithic record is, in fact, in every of these panels that I worked on, you find the constellations. You have a man that transforms through the mask of a bird into, let's say, called avianoid, birdman. Okay, and in every case, what the artist does is he shows that the person is in fact wearing a mask. So he shows the human mouth below it.
Okay.
So he transforms. He takes on the spirit of the bird, actually, as opposed to actually becoming the bird. Okay, and he does through wearing the mask. And in some of these panels, I have it in two different each one of them have at least two different places where the human character transforms. Okay, and so if you looked at that, you'd say, well, heck, that ain't it looks like an eagle beak, looks like a vulture beak, all these sort of things. But we can actually see through the parts of the body that's actually human that becomes the bird. Well, if you look at the so-called vulture on the so-called vulture stone, the neck is not of a bird. Okay, the roundish head is not of a bird. What it probably is, and the wings are too short to be anything that flies. Okay, and the legs are too short to be anything that can run away from anything. And it's not a swimming bird either. Okay, so if that bird existed, it didn't exist for more than a few days. Okay. Okay. So this is what I think what it is. I think it's an avianoid. I think it's the man that transforms into the bird. And I think and so this culture of the avianoid is all around the world. It's Native Americans. They would put on bird feathers. This across North America and even into South America, and they're simulating the transformation into the bird to reach into the great beyond. Okay, well, you find that everywhere in the world, and if they don't have a headdress, they've got one or two feathers in their hair, in their arms. So this concept of the avianoid, we find it in the Paleolithic cave ages 34,000 years ago, which is a heck of a lot older than Göbekli Tepe. And we find it everywhere in the world. So I believe that at some distant point in time, before the Paleolithic cave images, tens of thousands of years before, we had found this tradition of transforming into the bird to reach into the great beyond. What we thought the great beyond was is up for grabs.
Right.
But to reach to the great beyond, to speak to the great mystery. So what I think the so-called vulture on the so-called vulture stone is, I think it's an actual avianoid. It's the mix between the human and the man. So its back is roughly northwest. It's actually northwest. Okay, to that. Well, if we go back to the Paleolithic cave images, the avianoid character is is Hercules, now the constellation Hercules, who transforms through the now constellation Agila. Okay, so the eagle. Okay. Mm-hmm. And what happened is the hero goes on this journey. He goes through all these constellations and he picks up the strengths from them. And on this journey, he passes through and he picks up the strength of the eagle. Well, Hercules was a northerly constellation. In the Paleolithic, it's a northerly constellation now, and so is that so-called vulture. It's northwest, so it's in the zone. So what I believe that particular character is their version of the cosmic man, the Hercules, the shaman who picks up the strength of the bird on his journey. So there's actually another point that that resurfaces that draws that even back to the myth of Hercules, which goes back to the Paleolithic cave images, is what's right below that vulture?
What?
Scorpion.
No.
And so Scorpius, the constellation, is right below Hercules.
Okay. All
So
right.
this Hercules, the Hercules constellation goes back at least 34,000 because we've gotten the record, right? We actually in more than one panel, and more than one cave, and more than one time. I believe that the Göbekli Tepe is actually a resurfacing of this older Paleolithic cave image myth to 34,000 years ago.
Okay.
It's not a stretch at all. And so if you look at, if early we talked about Cirrus as a wolf or a dog finding in North America. Well, people in Beringia, they came down 15,000 years ago, but they arrived in Beringia about 22,000 years ago. Okay. So if they could carry a myth of Cirrus as a wolf or dog from 22,000 years ago after coming across Siberia and into the Americas 15,000 years ago, how big a trick is it to go from, Western North Africa or Europe to carry that myth over 30,000 years, or say 20,000 years, and a few thousand miles into Turkey?
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, it's an easy one. I think so most people are working on that concept. Well, it's Cygnus, and it's a bird, it's a vulture, and it eats the babies and all that sort of stuff. It's that's not how the shamanistic or its predecessor, the animistic mind worked. There's a hero. He goes on a journey, and he takes on the strengths of the animals as he moves along. And that's what we see in the Paleolithic cave images. And what's called the check on that whole thing is that the Greek constellations, Ptolemy's 48 in the Alchemist, is exactly the same characters in the same order as we find in the Paleolithic cave panels. So we have an ancient check to a very prehistoric constellation myth.
All right.
And I believe Göbekli Tepe is the same. I believe that particular stone is the same thing.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time. Tell people where they can find more about your work.
So the Before Orion is only available in Kindle books, actually not in ebooks, and whatever ebook reader you can possibly find. But you don't have to read the book. You can go to my webpage, beforeorion.com, and there's videos. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Reddit. I'm on all the social media. I put out my stuff, and say hi. Give it a thumbs up. Give it a thumbs down if you don't like it. Check out the videos, share it with your friends, and join us on the journey.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me, Bernie.
Soraya, thank you very much, and Happy New Year.
I would like to thank my awesome Patreons for all their support and all their help, and for continuing to help me make Where Did the Road Go a thing. So I would especially like to thank those of you pledging $10 or more: Tim, Allison Cook, Eric Hervin, Super Inframan, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Nadine, Damian Tallman, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Maria, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cicernos, Lindsey Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris is a hot dog a sandwich, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very, very much. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It is the first of 2020, and plenty of great stuff coming up here in the next few months. And at the end of this month is our 7th anniversary. Started this on January 26, 2013. That was the very first show. And I hope we'll be doing a UFO history show as well with Mike Cleland and Aaron Gullius. And who knows what else waits at the wings. All right. See you next time.